Yeah, that's huge. That's a lot to say. And that makes me so happy because yes, I want us, each one of us, each person listening, each person here on this world to be seen for the human that they are, and not, and that's something that you say a lot, and I've quoted you, see my heart past the labels, because we live with so many labels, and sometimes we can even exist functioning on those labels or on those markers. Oh, if I do this, then that, then, because it's a lot harder and requires a lot more resilience and a lot more groundedness and a lot more awareness to live in that authenticity, not just to be seen as it, but to live in it.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this No Label Live conversation. And boy, I am super excited. If you guys have been following along my journey on Clubhouse, you probably recognize this guest, or you will when you hear her. And Alina, right out of the gate, you're somebody who we connected, and we connected because we are both big fans of conversation, of like what human connection really is, and how to help people dive really deep really quickly. That's my experience. And you talk about people wanting to feel seen, heard, and known. So, my first question to you is, when you think about that from your experience, why are those things so important to you?
Diving right in. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen in with us. Yeah, we connected, Nathan and I, you and I connected so fast. I think there was a mutuality and a certain recognition that we saw in each other because we had a certain sense of shared values and that ability to reach out to not to people, not just to feel. I feel it in the sense, the difference between hearing a lot of chatting in the background, like having the TV on all day, versus being able to really connect and feel seen, heard, and known. And yeah, that is kind of like my go-to of what I want and what I want to inspire. Why so is because if you saw me or if you knew me, then you would say, oh, she totally has so many friends and lives so lively. And I think that I had this certain performance about it, but I didn't feel like anybody really knew me, or if I didn't feel like I could be myself, and certain projections or expectations wouldn't be placed on me. And so it was a lot easier for me, or a lot more comfortable for me, to pretend and to not try to show myself, because it would create discomfort in me and discomfort in others. Because I'm a very silly person. I'm also, I have my shadows. I'm kind of difficult sometimes. I can be a bit intense. And Nathan's laughing because he knows this is true. So I didn't want to be weird, and I didn't want to be too much, and I didn't want to be looked at. Like, in all honesty, I didn't want to be looked at. I didn't want to be known for who I was. And I used to have this shirt that it was like my motto, and it said, I want nothing, I fear nothing, I'm free. And I thought that that was the best, but I understood it in such a way that I'm going to want nothing. And I don't even want anyone to know what I want. because that will keep me safe. And that will keep me kind of hidden, and nobody will be able to use that information against me. And so but then I never felt really seen, heard, and known with the people that I wanted to feel it with. Like, not to say never, I do have some quite close relationships. And from there, I was able to grow. And I think it starts with one good relationship that you're able to like build off of, to have it with other people as well and create a sense of belonging. But in general, I didn't feel that. And so that's why it's so important to me, because that's how we can soothe our nervous system and soothe our senses and do everything we want to do. I mean, how do you feel? Like, what has been your, how did you feel when we connected, and what were those shared values that you felt also like you wanted to bring forward?
Yeah, I mean, I align completely with the idea of helping support people to feel seen, heard, and my third word is a little bit different, but I think it's like part of the same. Being known could also be interpreted as being valued or feeling valued. And I mean, from my experience, when you live with a disability, um, you are often invisible, even though you may be one of the most visible people in the world. And it comes from the idea that uh, people see the automatic difference if you have a physical disability. I know there are plenty of people with hidden disabilities that go through struggles as well that are different. But in my experience, when you have a physical disability, it's out there, it's in your face. There's no hiding that. If you, the only way I can hide that is because we're on Zoom and you can't see me moving around, right? But what I know is, even though it can show up and you can see that, so people stare at you all the time, they stare at me all the time, and yet I can still feel very alone in those moments, even though I know people are looking directly at me. And I hope that this will resonate with people who are watching. And so I made it part of my mission. And I think this was internally, even way before any of the stuff that I'm doing now, where I feel an obligation to show other people who don't have the circumstance, hey, I'm just a different form of human. Like, I have a different circumstance than you, but I'm still human. Because a lot of times, people with disabilities get treated like they're less than human. So that's why being seen is so important to me, because I know that that can provide leverage. Um, because often it's like, how many people with disabilities do you see? Not a lot. Definitely not as many of us that are actually out there. And there's an idea that we need to stay hidden. I still think that's prevalent. And the world's not as accessible for us. So it makes it very difficult to even go out in the world. Um,
I-
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I find it so interesting how you talk about how it will give leverage, like that act of being seen gives leverage. And I wanted to clarify what you meant.
Yeah. So because people see me, my voice matters, but they have to see me to know that I have a voice. If they don't see me, then being heard is not going to happen either. I think you have to have all three things in concert with one another to get the most. So being seen leverages or allows me the space to use my voice in the context that we've been talking to support other people with disabilities, but also show that I'm just a person. Like the disability is just a circumstance, and ultimately, it's a made up construct that we societally said this is what it means to have a disability. This is what it means to have things like mental illness. Like it's all socially made up. And I think that's the scary part a lot of times with the work that we do is we force like to be in connection. We're seeing parts of ourselves. So I'm you, you're me. And why do people often run when it comes to like they say, oh, don't say that, or um, they pull their kids away? It's because ultimately, I believe they're by actually having a conversation, they're confronting a part of themselves that they're not ready to look at yet.
Oh, that resonates so much. I think so. I mean, we're talking from a disability perspective, and I don't feel comfortable speaking to that. I don't have a visible disability. I don't have a disability, um, but that sense of when others are triggered, or when any person is triggered, it very much has to do with gunpowder underneath your own skin, you know, like, and it's happened to me where a certain situation will trigger me and I'll feel very upset, and I'll be confused as to what another person is doing and how they're reacting to me, and I'll get really personal about it. And when it gets so personal and I can't, and I feel their discomfort and my discomfort, and it interacts, and then I'll realize that has to do also with something underneath my own skin. And so I can definitely imagine that I can't agree more with what you're saying, that when a person is bothered or notices, or is confronting something in their own life and their own way of living and their
Yeah.
experience called life.
And it's funny because it makes me think of the four agreements, right? And one of the agreements is don't take things personal. And yet, I think that's when we're confronting issues like that, we start to take it very personally, and that gets in the way.
Yeah, I don't think that that's like 100%. It doesn't work for everything. I think life is personal, and the things that bother you are personal, and it's worth diving in and seeing what is that about. And when we don't do that practice, we can't connect with others because we don't know ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And it made me think of what you were saying made me think of our Clubhouse this week, and like you sent me a message, and you were like, I wasn't sure where this one was going. Um, I felt some stuff coming up, and that's I think you're right. It's like it's us living life and figuring out along the way what our what we get to peel back when it comes to um, how aware we are of ourselves at any given moment. Um,
Yeah, that definitely. Yeah, this week we had a clubhouse, and I one point in the conversation I wasn't sure like how to respond and how to interact, and it was a little, I got a little nervous, and then it flowed through, we flowed through it, and actually, like, it wasn't, discomfort is also not bad. It's just sometimes something that we're unaware of. We feel uncertain about it. I felt uncertain about what I could say to respect the conversation. And then I acknowledged it and we moved through, and it was beautiful at the end, like the contributions that were shared. And it reminds me right now, today I just had a consultation about the science of connection for an educational startup, about how to use human connection within a paradigm of learning. Because when we feel alone and stressed and isolated, it's very hard to feel motivated and grow and engage, right? So I work a lot with educators, and today we had that, and she had a very important question. I was explaining, I see it as a framework. We create a framework or a foundation upon which peers can learn, and students can learn, and facilitators can engage with their students. And so I was explaining this framework, and one of the participants asked me, okay, how can we set these rules? And then will that make us too focused on the result? So if I am only focusing on the 1, 2, 3, then, and for example, I want my students to engage more and they're feeling kind of in shutdown or in a low energy. We call it disassociation, we call it disengagement, we call it shutdown, we call it the dorsal vagal nervous system response, which can be good, but sometimes it's not helpful. That's the point. All our responses are fine, they're not wrong, but sometimes they're not helpful. So we were saying, if we wanted to encourage more engagement, how do we go from building this 1, 2, 3 and then just focusing on the result? And the truth is, that's a very good question, because sometimes we're so focused, okay, if I connect and then I'm not lonely, then I'll do this. But those discomforts are part of the learning process. And then pausing and saying, okay, well, maybe this is not working for me. And then pivoting, that is part of it. That's why presence is so important. And I think that was a really good point that you brought up, that we have to lean into those changes that you have to make on a contextual basis to see what's working or not.
And that brought up for me the idea of expectations again, right? Like if we're the 1, 2, 3, we have an expected, this is what I expect to happen. And I've learned to expect the unexpected. But I think that ultimately is one of the key things that creates barriers a lot of times, because first, I think it's whose expectation are we coming from? Like, is the expectation, like I talk about it in the terms of supposed to be all the time. Is it somebody else's? Is it a parent's expectation? Is it another family member or a friend's expectation? And does that line up with what you actually want? And again, like you mentioned that earlier in the conversation, did I or do I actually want people to know what I want?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Alegoria for a minute. So if you could give just a brief kind of summary about it, and then I've got a couple of questions for you.
Yes, for sure. So Alegoria is the social board game I co-created. And the purpose of creating this board game was making it easy to experience that human connection that leaves you feeling alive and soothed. And I get a lot those feelings that connect to the experience of answering question cards and filling up a mandala puzzle. The premise is very easy. You pick up a question card, you answer in your own interpretation from the word of I. Then you get the chance to ask questions to each other, to share, to call times up, maybe to ask the Alegoria, which is what does that tell you? And all of that flows and ebbs so that the experience of human connection is very fast and is very engaging and it's very enjoyable. And it was very important for us to enjoy, because sometimes we associate the sense of human connection to something very like heavy and intense, and it can be, but it can also be playful and fun. And having both of them is what makes us feel good in the end, like not just having one, not just having the silly playfulness, okay, but I want to talk about the shadows of life, and I don't want to just talk about the shadows of life, there's also a lot of light. So we wanted to make this so that that experience of feeling soothed and alive in a social context is possible, because once you feel that human connection, anything is possible. When we feel connected, like we take place in the groups that we do, in the social situations that we do, in the communities that we do, we feel like we belong, our doors open. And that's why I work with educators and coaches like Nathan, counselors, and even team leaders that are now focusing more and more to bring a focus of mental health in their team building exercises. So
Yeah,
that's
it's an amazing, it's my favorite tool to use. I use it all the time. And my first question for you is like, so 2020 happened, the pandemic happened, we all went into social distancing mode. And so, as someone who co created a tool for human connection, I'm curious what you learned during this year or the past year. And not only what did you learn from others, what did you learn about yourself through um, Alegoria and this previous year?
That's such a good question, especially like what did I learn of myself, not just about like the business or the way to use the game, because it is a board game, right? So you're supposed to play in person. So it's a lot harder to make that accessible when everyone is physically distancing. But at the same time, the need for Allegoria skyrocketed, because so much, I mean, we were already in a loneliness epidemic. We are already in it. But now add to it the stress of COVID and the loneliness and the isolation. I think we're gonna have very real repercussions, and it's being written about a lot. So on one hand, the need was very high, but the accessibility was a bit harder, just because we're meant to be together and have those human interactions. So I learned that, and so we made a web app to play it online. But we found that actually playing on Zoom with a physical board game where your facilitator fills out the mandala puzzle with you was the most enjoyable still, because that's where we get the most meaningful exchanges, where we're looking at each other's facial expressions. When I feel like, right now Nathan is nodding and like I sense like, yes, he gets me, he's listening, and I'm not just talking to myself, which happens a lot in COVID, living alone. So, those were very important pivots of bringing it online, of offering a lot more services in terms of business, a small business that we are. We're based in Canada. Our game right now is made in Canada. The designers were all Canadian. We're very local. We're still very small in that sense. So that was, being able to think outside of just the board game. So right now we offer game nights, like we have consultation to educators, we host private game sessions, team building sessions. I had to rethink how we would bring Alegoria to the world, as also a service, not just a product. And then what did I learn of myself? Oh my goodness, I learned too many things of myself. I spent too much time with myself trying to figure it all out. But what did I learn of myself that I think is most important? Um, I would have to say that I realized my own limitations that were getting in my way of bringing Alegoria to the world, of having very fixed ideas of how Alegoria was supposed to be played and experienced and who was supposed to bring it. And I really wanted to be just for family and friends. And it's being taken a lot more by coaches, and it really is a tool because it has the science behind it of nervous system regulation, the power of play. So I had to realize my own limiting beliefs, but I also learned that I'm not giving up and I'm a lot more strong-willed than I gave myself credit for.
That's
That
powerful.
was, yeah, before I viewed it as being stubborn, but now I'm going to call it strong-willed. Words matter.
Words do matter. And I don't even really remember how that our first conversation about Clubhouse went, but I'm like, yeah, so I think we should try this and see what happens. And like, that's definitely stepping out of those limiting beliefs, right? About what it is supposed to look like. And I mean, we've had some amazing conversations where we haven't actually seen each other for the most part. And
Yeah, almost weekly Clubhouse calls. And I think that was something very important because, for example, we're playing with participants that don't see us, they just hear us. And for some, that's very comfortable. As well, we also tie it to themes, and then we choose questions that relate to that most, or we answer the questions in context under a theme of the chosen theme of the conversation. And I was a little reluctant to do that before, to connect it to themes, because I want to have like an open palette when we talk with Alegoria and answer just whatever comes up to mind. But it's still very powerful and very, very moving to hear the exchanges that come across when Nathan and I are connecting on these calls.
yeah, it's been amazing. You had also said you wanted to talk a little bit and kind of get some of my thoughts on actually playing as a person with disabilities and how that could support. So, what's like one of the first questions you that come to mind as you think about that and expanding?
Yeah, you asked me, what would you want to incorporate into this call, into this conversation for the podcast? And I said, it's been very beneficial for me to dive deeper into the world that you bring to life through your coaching, through work that you do to support those with disabilities, to give them a voice. And I feel like I've benefited a lot, and I've learned a lot, and I've benefited in the sense of expanding my mind and having more of an understanding and more of a grounded idea in reality of what it is like to live with disabilities, because I have worked with some communities with disabilities, but not to this extent. So it's been very valuable for me to know more and to learn and to see how Alegoria can be part of that world. And we've had some conversations like the mandala board, the puzzle board. It's a mandala with a lot of irregular shapes, and there's
Oh
a
boy.
reason to. Yeah, so with Alegoria, the way we made is we want to use both sides of the brain. And actually, the more caught up in our stories and into the details we are, it's harder to put the pieces in. And the point is to bring you back to the present moment a lot of the time, but it's also, what did you call it?
Oh yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, I've got cerebral palsy and I have motor skill issues. So if you are an occupational therapist, even if you never use the cards at all with kids that you work with, if you get this puzzle, it will be a great addition to the therapy because I think I don't know what I said, but the first time I tried it, I was like, this is a pain in the ass. Like, this is so hard to put these puzzle pieces in here. I'm just gonna answer the questions. I don't need to. and it, and it, like, I think what you're saying though, like your intended reason for having the pieces, also plays a role in, like, it's not just the fine motor skills. If I'm like being challenged in my regulation, that's also going to play a role in. It's going to be more difficult for me to put it in place.
Yeah, and I remember you're like, oh my God, Alina, this is so hard. Like my motor skills, I don't know if I can. I was like, of course you can do this mandala. You think you're the only one who has a problem with this mandala? Like that's not true. It's so interesting to see um, when each person has a little bit of trouble putting the mandala pieces in. And what we intend with it is, yes, to use both sides of the brain to access those motor skills. But when we focus and when we, because it's very colorful and it's very beautiful, it turns into a very beautiful mandala that's very colorful and engaging. We soothe the senses. So the focus, the ability to place pieces as if we're placing the pieces of our life into a collaborative mandala, it's very soothing to the senses. And it's very visible when people have a hard time. It's often they're very up in we're up in our mind, and it's hard to concentrate. It's hard to really understand where things fit. And so it's because human connection is a practice. Making sense of our life experiences with practice. So yes, I wanted to know more. And my question to you was also, you also said, it's a motor skills exercise, but I also wanted to know, what, those with disabilities, you live a very unique life, not because of how you ended up with your disability, but because of the role you play afterwards. And for example, you were mentioning, to be looked at a lot and to be dealing with that, how there's not enough access, how it's not easy. And so I wanted to know more about that, and how has, like, and at this point, we've been working together for like 6 months, playing Alegoria at least every week, if not twice a week in our sessions in your group work. What does it mean for you, this kind of human connection that soothes the nervous system? And how do you see it for those with disabilities?
Um, yeah, I think it's huge because and I don't want to say it's therapy, right? I don't want to say, but I believe that that is something that it can be a tool to support if
Yeah.
somebody doesn't have access to therapy. And I know that can be issues for our community for sure. I mean, I get excited every time, and I've probably ran through every card. Um, and may not have answered them myself, but been a part of a conversation with every card. And what I find interesting is every time it's different. Like the answer can be different, and what I'm learning is again that fully present piece and the fact that um, we even in our authentic selves, we show up um, differently based on who we're with, and I still think that's authentic. Like, because
Yeah,
we're trying to figure out again, safety is a big thing, and so when I think about this, I think if you are somebody with a disability, one of the great things about this is it will give you a space to share where you may have never been able to feel like you could share before. Um, and I believe it will allow for more people to feel like they're seen for the person that they are and not how they've defined themselves by their disability.
yeah, that's huge. That's a lot to say. And that makes me so happy because yes, I want us, each one of us, each person listening, each person here on this world to be seen for the human that they are, and not, and that's something that you say a lot, and I've quoted you, see my heart past the labels, because we live with so many labels, and sometimes we can even exist functioning on those labels or on those markers. Oh, if I do this, then that, then, because it's a lot harder and requires a lot more resilience and a lot more groundedness and a lot more awareness to live in that authenticity, not just to be seen as it, but to live in it.
Yeah, because to live it means that you get to be okay when people don't. Because I used to say to be understood, like that used to be a big thing. But the more I'm doing this stuff, the more I'm coming to the realization that you're not always going to be understood. Even if you communicate something like immaculately, it doesn't mean that that person is ever going to understand it.
Yeah, and I think that there's a difference between understanding and accepting or
Mm,
acknowledging. Um, so actually for me, I was a very understanding person, and so I I interacted in relationships and in occasions that maybe didn't give me the best, or had the best in mind for me, or was slightly disrespectful, or just not what I wanted in my relationship, simply put. Not what I really wanted or what I really needed. And so I understood away all of the reasons, like, oh, and so that was like a rationalization.
yeah.
I rationalized all the way. I was like, well, I understand that this person is like this and like that. And so maybe I don't need the connection that I want.
Mm, yeah.
And so it's interesting that you're bringing up like, oh, I want to be understood. But even when I'm understood, do they really see me or
Yeah. Yep.
read me? Even if we're different, that doesn't mean being the same, but hearing me, witnessing me, it's
Mm,
different.
yeah. Oh man, I love this. So the question that it brought to mind for me, based on what you said, is this. So for you, what does a truly meaningful relationship look like?
Um, a truly meaningful, I always say that it starts with respect, respect for a person, for their humanity, for their reality, that their lived experience, you know, you can't really touch it. It's theirs. You can ask about it. You can want to be curious about it. I can want to understand, you know, I can want to delve deeper and I want to share it, but it's not for mine to control and it's not for me to manipulate. And those themes are very important to me. They're very, very important to me. And so a truly meaningful one would be one where each person can shine in their own right and share the lights and the shadows that come with living through a shared experience. And maybe not see eye to eye all the time, but respect each other's differences and enjoy those differences too. And that would be meaningful. And as long as those basic shared values or foundations are there, I think that it's possible, and it can be in a romantic relationship, in a friendship, in a person I see or meet on the street, a stranger. It can be in my family, my community. They're all truly meaningful. I love that question.
Yeah, I love to share, and it's for this reason because I think that um, since we've talked a lot about the disability community, I think that what you shared there is the the validation of an experience is a human want. And often I think that's one of the biggest things that's a barrier for the community is that validation of the experience that the community is having. And um, I think when my experience has been when something isn't validated as that's what's actually happening uh, in your life, I think people start to overcompensate to meet what they believe to be true to get that acceptance, whatever that looks like. When you invalidate someone, it's like saying, I don't accept you for who you are.
Yeah, and I kind of want to ask you, or I do want to ask you, and I'm not too sure how to express it, in the sense that I've been finding that, you know, society can very easily almost gaslight you into saying your experience is not real. And I can imagine, I can see how that even happens with those with disabilities. Like, oh, it's not that hard, or it's not that big of a deal if you're not seen as a human. You know, whatever crap or whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Uh-huh.
I shouldn't there. But you know, whatever nonsensical ridiculousness
Whatever
that's spewed.
bullshit that, yeah. Yeah.
There you go. You know, whatever is being said to say it's not that hard or it's not the way you feel it. And then definitely the overcompensation. And I want to know if you believe that it also can lead to self-invalidation, or like a sense of I'm crazy, I'm seeing things that aren't there, I'm imagining, I'm losing my mind, this sense of being lost, which it really is more than, you know, that sense of feeling crazy is really just the sense of being lost
Yeah.
and not knowing the right from the left, not being able to ground oneself in reality. And I think that that's such a trauma. So I'm wondering if that makes sense for
Yeah.
you.
That resonates with me huge. And I love it because I've never heard it framed in that way before. Um, I think when you spend a lot of time in that, um, like one of the phrases that I hate the most and hear it all the time is you you get to overcome your disability. I'm going to overcome it. And I think that's the way that a lot of conversations are framed. And I walk a really thin line with this because that's not how my parents raised me or the environment that I grew up in, but it's the world, the worldview that I grew up in. Um, and so I think when you're faced with this idea that you have to overcome a part of you, like this is
Mm.
something that's never it's never gonna go away. um and
And
it,
it's framing it like it should go away.
yeah. hmm and so that to me, like getting caught in that conversation, because it still happens because I'm human, thinking about overcoming something, like that's when I can get really lost. And okay, I have to overcome this thing. And thinking that way also can turn me into a really big asshole because I'm like, okay, I gotta prove you wrong. I think that's another thing where we get caught in wanting to prove everybody wrong,
Mm.
because we get told so often what we can't do. And so we're like, I'm gonna prove you wrong. My experience has taught me that that can create massive results, but it's not fulfilling or long lasting. It's something that's quick, and then um, I've noticed that for me, it can easily lead to resentment.
To who, to what? To the overcoming, to the disability, to you, to.
Um, hmm, that's such a great question. I think right now what's coming to me is the disability. I'm sure that's a like
Yeah.
context specific
Okay.
answer, but
Okay.
probably more often than not the disability itself.
Yeah.
Woo! Ladies and
Woo!
gentlemen, I didn't know where this conversation was going, but I hope you like it. I always enjoy these conversations.
I definitely do. There's always surprise in our conversation. I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask Alegoria then in this moment. I see like you're good for it. What does that tell you?
What does that tell me? Um, Honestly, right now, what it's telling me is I'm on the quote right path. I'm going in a direction that I want because I have more self-awareness than I've ever had before. And so even to be able to say when I get caught in this mode of thinking, this is what happens, that's huge. So it tells me to keep working, um, keep doing the work, keep having these conversations, keep showing up for game nights, um, and
Clubhouse.
yeah, that's what it's telling me. I got a couple more questions before our time is up, and so talking
Thank you.
about the game a little bit, I'm curious. Uh, what's your what's your favorite card when you see it get pulled? You kind of light up because you remember the conversation you guys had when picking what the conversations were going to be on the cards. But what's that card for you?
Um, that's a well, now I have a lot of cards in mind with all your suggestions. So it changes. It changes, doesn't change. The one that I always loved, and so it's like my email signature and I use a lot, is the one that asks, how would it be to let go of a red helium balloon? And I love that one for many reasons. For one reason, I think we even talked about is like, how come it's always red that comes up in our minds sometimes? Like very often we get the color red, and it's a very like collective experience. I played it with some teachers and we were talking about that. And then someone was like, yeah, but I didn't even think about the balloon. I just thought about the kids, like the sense of being a kid and playing. And then we'll get also some individuals who worry about the environmental impact, and then they get to share about that. And so it can be a little controversial, but I love that it inspires such different answers. And I also love it because when I was a child, I mean, this I think says something of why I'm making a tool for communication and for nervous system regulation. Is I used to write messages on the balloons, and I'd hope that people in other windows would see them. And then if it ever let go, well, I imagined that for some reason it was always Russia. And I imagined that somebody in Russia would find the balloon and see the message and know. And I was obsessed with that sense of like a message in a bottle that would go through the ocean. So it brings me to that, and I love that question. But there's so many now that I love. The one that I made, a lot of them I co-worked. So the game architect, who is my mom, she is the one who made the game design and a lot of the questions. But one of the questions I made was, when were you surprised by something you did? When was the last time you were surprised by something you did? And this was a question that I wrote because I was making Alegoria and it was surprising me that I was going through with it.
Mm.
I like that one as well. It's sentimental.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like that it came up in that moment because you were surprised by what you were creating in that moment. That's awesome. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and there's so many good uh, you know, when I say good, you guys get to label that for yourself. But so many questions that resonate, and I'll just share one of mine, and it's the one about I don't remember exactly, but it's the one about the rain, right?
How
How,
does the rain feel?
yeah, yeah, and so we were in a conversation where a lot of us we had the same like reaction, and it wasn't like it's amazing. It was like, damn, it presents a level of fear because I'm always thinking about, am I going to trip and slip and fall? And so it's just that resonates, and it just shows, like we've been talking, that so many different things can bring up so many experiences that are completely different, and that's the beauty of the game, right? So now you've expanded your perception of what's even possible because
Mm.
someone else brought in their point of view and how they see it from their eyes. And I think that's what makes it one of the things that makes it super powerful. um I have two more questions. Number one, what's something that I haven't asked you about in our time together that you wish we could talk about?
It's a good one. No, what haven't we talked about? Nathan, we've talked about so many things. Every time we talk about something new, like something new comes up, but I was excited for this conversation to have more of an understanding of where you come from and how human connection in this way is experienced by somebody with cerebral palsy. But I only have questions for you, like that I don't want to ask you. You know,
Okay,
like,
well,
yeah,
we
okay,
we
well,
can we can take care of those.
yeah. I want to know, what, I'm gonna try to put all my questions into one question. I would want to know, for example, what do you believe is there's such an incentive and a sense of movement and direction with this work. With your work, I want to be you are the greatest loneliness coach that can impact like millions of lives, and so in that process, where do you hope to end up in terms of feeling with yourself?
Wait, hold on. I just need to know in terms of feeling or healing.
Feeling. So for example, I know because we've talked about this, that you want to expand your coaching to impact more lives, to
Yeah.
bring a voice for those with disabilities to know that they don't have to live with that label. But in sense of like, what kind of feelings would that bring for you, or what sensation would that bring for you?
Yeah. Fulfillment is what's coming up for me in this moment. Like it's funny, as you were asking the question, um what I was envisioning was I was envisioning Tony Robbins, to be honest. And I don't even necessarily like Tony Robbins, but that's where I want to end up, and that's the level at which I want to be operating. And I think whatever that looks like, uh, that will bring a tremendous sense of fulfillment to me, because I know that I'm reaching as many people as I can at the moment. And I just want people to feel like they have the tools to connect in the way that they want, and to find the people that they resonate with. Because I think so often we get caught up in the, like, we're friends with the people that we always grew up with because they're the only people that we see, they're readily available. And I want people to realize that we can be more connected than ever before, and that space, like physical space, shouldn't be a limiter anymore. And I think this, I did not expect like all this to come up, but I think for all the people who have disabilities who see this, I think that you have to have courage, and you have to take a risk to say, I'm going to use the tools available to me to connect with other people, even if up until this point you've always felt like nobody's ever going to understand you. Like, we're at a point where it's time to make happen what you want to have happen, because there's no excuse anymore to say, I'm stuck at home. There's no excuse to let that limit how you connect with people.
Thank you.
Whew.
I really resonate with that, and I want to share as well, since we're talking about things we haven't talked about. I definitely feel that what you were sharing, and that for me, that purpose, it's very easy to fall into that cycle of doing and go, go, go. And if I really think about where do I want to end up, why do I do it? It's the same. I want to feel like I and as many people possible feel like they can do what they want to do, that you are empowered and capable of being at peace in your heart, of feeling fulfilled and feeling like you belong. And the tool for me is human connection.
Yeah.
Both the the journey and the destination, the tool and the final. And then it comes back, and I talk also about this in my workshops, that it's like a vicious cycle. Loneliness, dysregulation, stress, it's a vicious cycle. The more I dysregulate the more my nervous system is dysregulated, the more that I feel lonely, the more I'm unmotivated, the more I don't want to try new things, the more I don't have the capacity and I'm too overwhelmed for curiosity or creativity or imagination. And it just keeps going. And it's harder and harder. And so expanding and engaging in human connection, doing things that soothe your senses and regulate the nervous system, that's like a virtuous cycle. And that's what I care about. So thank you.
Yeah. No. Hey, you started the question, so thank yourself. Yeah, so before I ask the final question, if somebody's watching this, they really resonate and they're like, okay, now I got to get Alegoria. I got to see what this is about. How do they do that?
You go onto alegoriagame.com and you get your tool that acts like a game. And it's in English, French, and English, Spanish, and it's online, alegoriagame.com, and you buy it right there. Very easy.
And
we ship from Canada as soon as possible.
And it arrives quickly. My experience tells me. I can't guarantee that. The final question is, what does no label defines me mean to you?
I love that you're working on these no label defines me. No label defines me. I had issues with my personal relationships, and I had to disconnect the sensation of just because I'm nice and friendly does not mean I'm a pushover, and doesn't mean that I cannot have the human connection I want. Doesn't mean that I can't have the relationships and friendships and family relationships and communities that I yearn for. So no label defines me. Just because I'm open and welcoming and kind doesn't mean that I have to suck up to or suck it up any very difficult situations. I can instead unpack them, process them, and let go of them when I need. So that's what comes up for me. And that's why the rules of Alegoria are so important to me now whenever I interact with anybody.
That's amazing. Yeah. You have all the tools within you to do all those things. And that I'm speaking to you and to the audience member, because I know that resonated with somebody who's listening or watching. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've loved this conversation, and I can't wait to hear back from everybody who participates in this with us.
Thank you so much, Nathan. This was amazing. I love being on your podcast, and I have so enjoyed our game nights and our conversations. And thank you to everyone listening. If this resonates with you, you probably have found Nathan on Instagram. You can also find us at Alegoria Game, and I love continuing the conversation. Thank you.